Welcome back, everyone. In this video, we're diving deep into CISSP Domain 1, Security and Risk Management. But I'm going to do something different. I'm not just going to lecture you. For each major concept, I'll explain it from both the technical and the business side. Then I'll give you 3 questions. Here's how it works: I'll read each question and the possible answers. Then I'll tell you to pause the video and think for a few seconds. You'll come up with your answer. Then I'll reveal the correct answer and explain exactly why it's right and why the other options are wrong. After that, I'll share 3 common traps that even experienced professionals fall into, and 3 practical tips to help you master the topic. My goal is to make sure you not only recognize these concepts on the exam but you can actually apply them under pressure. Stick with me until the end, and you'll walk away with a strategic risk mindset. Let's get started. Let's start with the foundation of everything we do as CISSP professionals. The ISC2 Code of Ethics. This is not just a list of nice words. It is a binding, enforceable code that every certified member must follow. Violating it can get your certification revoked. So you need to understand it deeply, not just memorize the canons. From a technical perspective, the code guides every decision you make. How do you handle a vulnerability you discover? Do you disclose it immediately? To whom? How do you respond to an incident that might involve illegal activity? The code gives you the answers. From a business perspective, the code builds trust. Clients, regulators, and the public need to know that security professionals operate with integrity. Without that trust, our entire profession collapses. There are 4 mandatory canons, and they are hierarchical. This is critical. You cannot apply them in any order. Canon 1 comes first, even before your employer's interests. Canon 1, protect society, the common good, and public trust. This means public safety and welfare override everything else. If you discover a flaw that could harm people, you have an obligation to act, even if your boss says no. Canon 2, act honorably, honestly, justly, responsibly, and legally. This means no cutting corners, no lying to clients, no covering up mistakes. It also means following the law, even when it's inconvenient. Canon 3, provide diligent and competent service to your principals. Your principals are your employers or clients. You owe them your best work. But notice, Canon 3 comes after Canons 1 and 2. You serve your employer, but not at the expense of society or your own integrity. Canon 4, advance and protect the profession. This means mentoring others, sharing knowledge, and never doing anything that brings the profession into disrepute. If you act unethically, you hurt every other security professional. Now, let's test your understanding. I'm going to read the first question. Question 1. A security engineer discovers a critical vulnerability that could leak customer data. Her manager tells her to ignore it because fixing it would cost too much. What should she do? A. Obey her manager to keep her job. B. Document the risk and escalate within the organization. C. Immediately post the vulnerability on social media. D. Quit without notice. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is B. Document the risk and escalate. Here's why. Canon 1 says protect society. Ignoring the vulnerability could harm customers. The engineer has an obligation to raise the issue internally first. Option C, posting on social media, violates responsible disclosure and could cause panic. Option D, quitting, doesn't solve the problem, the vulnerability remains. Option A, obeying, would make her complicit in potential harm. The code expects her to be brave, not obedient. Question 2. A CISSP consultant is hired to assess a client's network. He finds evidence that the client is knowingly selling defective medical devices that could harm patients. The client refuses to act. What is the consultant's primary obligation? A. Maintain client confidentiality. B. Report the issue to the appropriate regulators. C. Complete the assessment and walk away. D. Confront the CEO directly. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is B. Report to regulators. This is Canon 1 in action. Protecting society overrides client confidentiality. The consultant cannot simply walk away, option C, because the harm will continue. Confronting the CEO, option D, may be a step, but if the client refuses to act, the consultant must go to authorities. Confidentiality, option A, is not absolute when human life is at risk. Question 3. A security manager is asked by her CEO to sign a false compliance report indicating that all systems are patched when they are not. The CEO says it's just a formality. What should she do? A. Sign the report but keep a private note of the truth. B. Refuse to sign and resign immediately. C. Refuse to sign, document the request and escalate to the board or legal. D. Sign and then anonymously leak the truth to auditors. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is C. Refuse to sign, document the request and escalate internally. Signing the false report, options A or D, makes her complicit in fraud. Resigning immediately, option B, might feel honorable, but it leaves the problem unresolved and does not fulfill her duty to protect the organization from itself. Escalating to the board or legal gives leadership a chance to correct the issue. If they also refuse, then further action, including resignation or reporting, may be necessary. Let me share 3 traps that even experienced professionals sometimes fall into. Trap number 1, thinking that the employer always comes first. The code explicitly places society above employer. You are not a soldier blindly following orders. You are a professional with a higher duty. Trap number 2, confusing acting honorably with simply following the rules. The code expects you to do what is right, not just what is legal. Sometimes the legal path is also the ethical path. But sometimes, laws lag behind ethics. Your judgment matters. Trap number 3, believing that silence is neutral. When you know of harm, saying nothing is not neutral. It is complicity. The code demands action, not silence. Now, let me give you 3 practical tips to master this concept for the exam and for your career. Tip 1, memorize the 4 canons in order: society, honorable conduct, competent service, advance the profession. Write them on a flashcard. Repeat them until they are automatic. Tip 2, on the exam, when you see an ethics question, always choose the answer that protects the public first. Even if that answer seems uncomfortable or unpopular. The exam writers are testing your willingness to put society above convenience. Tip 3, ask yourself a simple question before any ethical decision: would I be comfortable explaining this action on the front page of a newspaper? If the answer is no, don't do it. That test has saved many careers. You now have a solid foundation in the CISSP 2 Code of Ethics. Keep this with you. It will guide you not only on the exam but through your entire professional life. Now let's talk about 3 foundational models that you will see on almost every page of the CISSP exam. The CIA triad, the DAD triad, and the IAAA framework. These are the building blocks of information security. From a technical perspective, the CIA triad defines what we protect. Confidentiality means keeping secrets secret. We use encryption and access controls. Integrity means ensuring data is accurate and unaltered. We use hashing and digital signatures. Availability means ensuring systems are accessible when needed. We use redundancy and failover. From a business perspective, these 3 principles often conflict. A hospital needs high availability. Patient records must be accessible even if that means slightly less confidentiality. A defense contractor needs high confidentiality. They would rather take a system offline than risk a leak. Understanding the trade-offs is critical. Now, the DAD triad is the flip side of CIA. It describes the threats against each principle. Disclosure is the violation of confidentiality, someone sees data they shouldn't. Alteration is the violation of integrity, someone changes data without authorization. Destruction is the violation of availability, data or systems are deleted or made inaccessible. Every attack maps to one of these three. A data breach is disclosure. A SQL injection that modifies records is alteration. A ransomware attack that encrypts files is destruction. Finally, the IAAA framework describes how we manage access. Identification is claiming an identity, a username. Authentication is proving that identity, a password, a fingerprint, a smart card. Authorization is determining what you're allowed to do, permissions on a file. Accounting is logging what you did, audit trails and non-repudiation. You cannot have security without all four. Now, let's test your understanding. Question 1. A hospital's electronic health record system goes down during a power outage, and doctors cannot access patient allergy information. Which CIA principle is primarily violated? A. Confidentiality. B. Integrity. C. Availability. D. Non-repudiation. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is C. Availability. The data is still confidential and has integrity, but it is inaccessible. Availability is about uptime and access. Non-repudiation is part of IAAA, not CIA. Question 2. An attacker uses a man-in-the-middle attack to read confidential emails between two executives. This is an example of which DAD threat? A. Alteration. B. Disclosure. C. Destruction. D. Authentication failure. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is B. Disclosure. The attacker is reading data they should not see. Alteration would be changing the emails. Destruction would be deleting them. Authentication failure is not a DAD term, it relates to IAA. Question 3. A user logs into a system with a username and password. The system then checks an access control list to see if the user can open a specific file. Which two IAAA components are being used in this order? A. Identification then authorization. B. Authentication then authorization. C. Identification then authentication. D. Authorization then accounting. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is B. Authentication then authorization. The username provides identification, but the password provides authentication, proving who you are. After authentication, the system checks authorization, the access control list. The question asks for the two components in order after the login. Authentication happens first, then authorization. Let me share 3 traps that even experienced professionals sometimes fall into. Trap number 1, confusing integrity with availability. Integrity is about data being correct and unaltered. Availability is about data being accessible. If a file is corrupted but still accessible, that's an integrity issue. If a file is perfectly correct but the server is down, that's availability. Trap number 2, thinking that confidentiality is always the most important principle. The exam loves to test your ability to prioritize based on context. For a public website, availability might be more important than confidentiality. For a military system, confidentiality is paramount. Trap number 3, mixing up authentication and authorization. Authentication is proving who you are, the login step. Authorization is what you're allowed to do, the permission step. Many candidates see access denied and think authentication failed, but if the user successfully logged in, authentication succeeded, authorization failed. Now, let me give you 3 practical tips to master these concepts. Tip 1. Memorize the CIA triad and for each, no one control and one attack. Confidentiality, encryption protects, disclosure attacks. Integrity, hashing protects, alteration attacks. Availability, redundancy protects, destruction attacks. Tip 2. For IAAA, remember the pipeline, you cannot authorize before you authenticate, and you cannot authenticate before you identify. The order is fixed: identification, authentication, authorization, accounting. Tip 3. On the exam, when you see a scenario, first ask, is this about protecting data, CIA, threatening data, DAD, or controlling access, IAA? That will narrow your answer choices significantly. You now have a solid grasp of the core triads. They will appear in every domain of the exam. Now let's talk about how we organize security documentation. You cannot run a security program with random pieces of paper. You need a clear hierarchy. The 4 key document types are policies, standards, procedures, and guidelines. Understanding the difference between them is essential for the exam and for building a functional security program. From a technical perspective, each document serves a different purpose and sits at a different level of detail. Policies are broad and strategic. Standards are specific and mandatory. Procedures are step-by-step and operational. Guidelines are recommended and flexible. From a business perspective, this hierarchy ensures consistency, enforceability, and legal defensibility. If an employee violates a security rule, you need to show that the rule was clearly documented, mandatory, and communicated. The hierarchy tells everyone what is required and what is just advice. Let me define each one clearly. Policies are the highest level. They answer the question what at a strategic level. A policy is a broad statement of management's intent. For example, all customer data must be protected. Policies are mandatory, you cannot opt out. But they do not give technical details. They set the direction. Policies come from senior management and apply to the entire organization. Standards are below policies. They answer the question must at a technical level. A standard translates a policy into a specific, enforceable requirement. For example, all customer data must be encrypted using AES 256. Standards are also mandatory. They leave no room for interpretation. If a standard says passwords must be 12 characters, then 11 characters is non-compliant. Procedures are below standards. They answer the question how at an operational level. A procedure is a step-by-step instruction for performing a specific task. For example, Step 1, open the encryption tool. Step 2, select the file. Step 3, choose AES 256 from the drop-down menu. Step 4, enter the encryption key. Step 5, click Encrypt. Procedures are mandatory when performing that task. If you are encrypting a file, you must follow the procedure. Guidelines are different. They answer the question should at a recommendation level. A guideline is a best practice or advice. For example, it is recommended that users choose passphrase rather than simple passwords. Guidelines are explicitly non-mandatory. You can choose not to follow a guideline if you have a good reason, but you cannot ignore a standard. Now, let's test your understanding. Question 1. A document states, all remote access connections must use a VPN with AES 256 encryption and multi-factor authentication. What type of document is this? A. Policy. B. Standard. C. Procedure. D. Guideline. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is B. Standard. It is specific, technical, and mandatory. The word must indicates a requirement. A policy would be broader, like remote access must be secure. A procedure would be step-by-step. A guideline would use should or recommended. Question 2. A document provides screenshots and field-by-field instructions for requesting a new user account in the identity management system. What type of document is this? A. Policy. B. Standard. C. Procedure. D. Guideline. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is C. Procedure. It is step-by-step and task-oriented. It tells you exactly how to perform a specific action. A standard would say what must be done, not how to click the buttons. Question 3. A company has a policy that says all data classification must be maintained. Which of the following is an example of a guideline that supports this policy? A. All confidential data must be encrypted. B. It is recommended to mark the classification label in the document header. C. Step 1. Right-click the file. Step 2. Select Properties. Step 3. Choose classification level. D. Data classification is mandatory for all employees. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is B. The phrase "it is recommended" indicates a guideline. Option A is a standard, must. Option C is a procedure, step by step. Option D is a policy statement, broad and mandatory. Let me share 3 traps that even experienced professionals sometimes fall into. Trap number 1, confusing standards with procedures. A standard tells you what must be done. A procedure tells you how to do it. A standard might say passwords must be changed every 90 days. A procedure tells you how to change your password in Windows, Linux, or Mac OS. They serve different purposes. Trap number 2, thinking that guidelines are optional in a way that means you can ignore them without consequence. While guidelines are not mandatory, ignoring a well-founded guideline without justification can still be considered negligence. If a guideline says use multi-factor authentication for administrative accounts and you don't, and a breach happens, you may be held liable. Non-mandatory does not mean unimportant. Trap number 3, having policies that contradict lower-level documents. The hierarchy must be consistent. If a policy says protect customer data but a standard allows unencrypted transmission, that is a governance failure. Every standard must align with the policy above it. Every procedure must align with the standard above it. Now, let me give you 3 practical tips to master this concept. Tip 1, memorize the hierarchy with a simple mnemonic: policy, why, standard, what must, procedure, how, guideline, should. Another way: policies are broad, standards are specific, procedures are step-by-step, guidelines are advice. Tip 2, on the exam, look for keywords. Must or shall indicates a standard. Should or recommended indicates a guideline. Step-by-step language like Step 1, Step 2 indicates a procedure. Broad statements of intent indicate a policy. Tip 3, remember that guidelines are the only document type that is explicitly non-mandatory. All others, policies, standards, and procedures, are mandatory. If you see a document that uses should or consider, it is almost certainly a guideline. This document hierarchy keeps your security program organized, enforceable, and defensible. Master it. Now let's talk about 4 critical personnel controls that prevent fraud, detect hidden anomalies, and protect against insider threats. These are separation of duties, split knowledge, job rotation, and mandatory vacations. The exam loves to test your ability to distinguish between them and apply them in the right scenarios. From a technical perspective, these controls limit the power of any single individual. Separation of duties requires 2 or more people to complete a critical action. Split knowledge means each person holds only part of a secret, neither can act alone. Job rotation moves people between roles periodically. Mandatory vacations force employees to take time off so others can review their work. From a business perspective, these controls reduce the risk of fraud, embezzlement, and other malicious insider actions. They also help detect errors and uncover long-term abuse that might otherwise remain hidden. Let me define each one clearly. Separation of duties. This means requiring multiple individuals to complete a critical task. No single person has enough authority to perform the entire action alone. The classic example is financial transactions. One person initiates a payment, another person approves it. Neither can complete the transaction alone. In security, you might separate the ability to request access from the ability to approve access. Separation of duties is a preventive control. It stops fraud before it happens. Split knowledge. This is related but different. Split knowledge means that no single person possesses all the information needed to perform a critical action. Each person holds a fragment of a secret. The classic example is a two-person rule for launching a missile. Each has a key, and both keys must be turned simultaneously. Another example is splitting a cryptographic key into two parts, stored by different people. Neither person can act alone. Split knowledge is also preventive. Job rotation. This means shifting responsibilities periodically. The person who manages firewall rules this quarter might manage identity management next quarter. Job rotation uncovers long-term undetected abuse because different people see different things. If one person has been committing fraud for years, a new person rotating into that role might notice anomalies. Job rotation is a detective control. It helps uncover hidden issues. Mandatory vacations. This forces employees in sensitive positions to take 2 consecutive weeks off. During that time, someone else, a peer or an auditor, must perform their duties. Why does this work? Because if someone is committing fraud or hiding abuse, they cannot keep it hidden for 2 straight weeks. The temporary replacement will notice discrepancies. Mandatory vacations are also a detective control. They are required by many regulations, including financial industry rules. Now, let's test your understanding. Question 1. A company requires that any wire transfer over $10,000 must be initiated by one employee and approved by a different employee. No single person can complete the transfer alone. What control is this? A. Split knowledge. B. Separation of duties. C. Job rotation. D. Mandatory vacation. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is B. Separation of duties. 2 different people are required to complete the action. Split knowledge would involve each holding a partial secret, like 2 halves of a key. Here, it's about authority and approval, not secrets. Question 2. A cryptographic key is divided into 2 parts. The security manager holds one part, and the database administrator holds the other. Neither can decrypt the data alone. What control is this? A. Separation of duties. B. Split knowledge. C. Job rotation. D. Mandatory vacation. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is B. Split knowledge. Each person holds a fragment of the secret, and both are required to reconstruct the full secret. This is different from separation of duties, which is about authorizing an action, not reconstructing a secret. Question 3. An organization requires all employees in the finance department to take 2 consecutive weeks off each year. During that time, a temporary employee performs their duties. What is the primary purpose of this control? A. To give employees rest. B. To uncover fraud or anomalies that would be detected when someone else performs the duties. C. To reduce payroll costs. D. To comply with labor laws only. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is B. Mandatory vacations are a detective control designed to uncover hidden fraud or abuse. If someone is committing fraud, they cannot maintain the illusion for 2 straight weeks. While rest and compliance are secondary benefits, the security purpose is detection. Let me share 3 traps that even experienced professionals sometimes fall into. Trap number 1, confusing separation of duties with split knowledge. Separation of duties is about authorization, 2 people approving an action. Split knowledge is about secrets, 2 people holding fragments of a key or password. They are both preventive, but they apply to different scenarios. On the exam, look for keywords. Approval or authorization points to separation of duties. Key or secret points to split knowledge. Trap number 2, thinking that job rotation and mandatory vacations serve the same purpose. They are both detective, but job rotation is proactive. You move people intentionally to uncover issues. Mandatory vacations are also detective, but they rely on absence, not reassignment. Both can expose fraud, but mandatory vacations are specifically about forcing absence so others must step in. Trap number 3, believing that these controls are only for financial departments. They apply to any sensitive role: system administrators, database managers, security engineers, developers with access to production. Anyone with privileged access should be subject to these controls. Now, let me give you 3 practical tips to master these concepts. Tip 1, memorize the 4 controls with a simple table. Separation of duties, preventive, requires multiple people to authorize. Split knowledge, preventive, requires multiple people to reconstruct a secret. Job rotation, detective, periodic reassignment to uncover abuse. Mandatory vacations, detective, forced absence to expose anomalies. Tip 2, on the exam, when you see a scenario about 2 people approving a transaction, think separation of duties. When you see 2 halves of a key, think split knowledge. When you see everyone rotates roles every 6 months, think job rotation. When you see 2 weeks off annually, think mandatory vacations. Tip 3, remember that these controls are often required by compliance frameworks like SOX, PCI DSS, and NIST. The exam expects you to recommend them in scenarios involving insider threat, fraud prevention, or privileged access management. You now have a solid understanding of these essential personnel controls. Use them to build a stronger security program. Now let's talk about how we systematically identify threats. You can't protect against what you can't name. That's why we have Stride. It's a threat modeling framework created by Microsoft. Each letter represents a category of threat. From a technical perspective, Stride helps you enumerate all the ways an attacker could cause harm. You look at your system and ask, where could someone spoof an identity? Where could they tamper with data? Where could they deny an action? Where could information be disclosed? Where could denial of service happen? Where could privileges be elevated? From a business perspective, using Stride shows stakeholders that you have a complete threat model. It prevents you from missing entire classes of attacks. Let me define each one clearly. S for spoofing, pretending to be someone or something you're not. Examples: phishing emails, fake websites, IP address spoofing. The countermeasure is strong authentication. T for tampering, unauthorized modification of data. Examples: changing a configuration file, altering a database record, modifying a log file. The countermeasure is integrity controls like hashing and access restrictions. R for repudiation, denying that you performed an action. Example: I didn't delete those files. The countermeasure is non-repudiation through digital signatures and audit logs. I for information disclosure, unauthorized exposure of sensitive data. Examples: a data breach, a misconfigured cloud bucket, a lost laptop. The countermeasure is encryption and access controls. D for denial of service, making a system or resource unavailable. Examples: DDoS attacks, ransomware that encrypts files, physical destruction. The countermeasure is redundancy, failover, and rate limiting. E for elevation of privilege, gaining higher privileges than authorized. Examples: a standard user becoming an admin, an attacker exploiting a buffer overflow to run code as system. The countermeasure is least privilege and proper input validation. Now, let's test your understanding. Question 1. An attacker intercepts a network communication and changes the dollar amount in a financial transaction before it reaches the bank. Which stride category does this represent? A. Spoofing. B. Tampering. C. Repudiation. D. Information disclosure. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is B. Tampering. Because the data was altered without authorization. Spoofing would be pretending to be the bank. Repudiation would be denying the action later. Information disclosure would be reading the data, not changing it. Question 2. A user logs into a system, deletes several critical files, and later claims their account was hacked. The security team reviews logs that show the user's digital signature was used for the deletion. Which stride threat is being addressed by the digital signature? A. Spoofing. B. Tampering. C. Repudiation. D. Denial of service. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is C. Repudiation. The digital signature provides non-repudiation, the user cannot deny they performed the action. Spoofing would be someone else pretending to be the user. Tampering would be altering the logs themselves. Denial of service would be making the system unavailable. Question 3. A web application allows a standard user to access administrative functions by manipulating a URL parameter. Which stride category best describes this? A. Information disclosure. B. Denial of service. C. Elevation of privilege. D. Spoofing. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is C. Elevation of privilege. The user is gaining higher privileges than authorized. Information disclosure would be reading admin data, not executing admin functions. Denial of service would be crashing the app. Spoofing would be pretending to be an admin, but here the user is real, just exploiting a flaw. Let me share 3 traps that even experienced professionals sometimes fall into. Trap number 1, confusing spoofing with elevation of privilege. Spoofing is about false identity. Elevation of privilege is about a real identity gaining extra rights. If the attacker is using their own account but exploiting a flaw to get admin rights, that's elevation, not spoofing. Trap number 2, forgetting that repudiation is about denying an action, the countermeasure is non-repudiation, like audit logs and digital signatures. Many candidates remember the threat but forget how to prevent it. Trap number 3, thinking that denial of service only applies to networks. It applies to any resource, CPU, memory, storage, even physical access. A person blocking a doorway is a denial of service attack. Now, let me give you 3 practical tips to master this concept. Tip 1, memorize the mnemonic stride and for each category, know one example and one countermeasure. Write them in a table and review daily. Tip 2, when you see a scenario on the exam, map it to the category before looking at the answers. Say to yourself, this is about data being changed, that's tampering. Then look for the matching answer. Tip 3, practice with real incidents. Read a breach report or a vulnerability disclosure and ask which stride categories apply. This builds pattern recognition. Stride is a powerful tool. Use it to think like an attacker. Now let's talk about the fundamental equation that drives all risk management. You cannot manage risk without understanding the relationship between assets, vulnerabilities, threats, and the resulting risk. The conceptual formula shown on this slide is, asset plus vulnerability plus threat equals risk. I want to be very clear about this formula. It is a conceptual model, it's used to identify the 3 components that must be present for risk to exist. It is not a mathematical formula you would use for calculations. In real-world risk management, the actual calculation is likelihood times impact, where the likelihood depends on the threat and vulnerability, and the impact depends on the asset value. The key takeaway is, if any one of these components is missing, there is no risk. No asset. No risk. No vulnerability. No risk. No threat. No risk. The additive model helps you remember that all three are necessary. Now let me define each component clearly from both technical and business perspectives. Asset, this is the valuable item you are trying to protect. It can be tangible, like a server, a laptop, a building. Or intangible, like customer data, intellectual property, or your company's reputation. The value of the asset determines how much you should spend to protect it. From a business perspective, assets are what you insure, what you list on your balance sheet, and what your shareholders care about. Vulnerability, this is a weakness in your defense. It could be a missing patch, a weak password policy, a lack of security awareness, or a physical door left unlocked. Vulnerabilities exist independently of threats. A vulnerability is just a hole, it only becomes dangerous when a threat finds it. From a technical perspective, vulnerabilities are what you scan for, patch, and mitigate. Threat, this is the potential harm that could exploit a vulnerability. Threats can be intentional, like a hacker or a disgruntled employee. Or unintentional, like a natural disaster or a user error. Threats also have vectors, the path they take, like a phishing email or a USB drive. From a business perspective, threats are the risks you transfer through insurance or avoid by changing processes. Risk, this is the combination of all three. In conceptual terms, risk exists when an asset has a vulnerability that a threat could exploit. In quantitative terms, risk is calculated as likelihood times impact. The likelihood is the probability that a threat will exploit a vulnerability. The impact is the dollar loss or operational damage to the asset. Low likelihood, low impact equals low risk. High likelihood, high impact equals high risk. You cannot have risk without all three components. Now, let's test your understanding. Question 1. An organization has a critical database server worth $1 million. The server has a known unpatched vulnerability. There are currently no active threats targeting this specific vulnerability. According to the conceptual model, what is the risk? A. High, because the asset value is high. B. Low, because there is no active threat. C. Medium, because the vulnerability exists. D. Zero, because the server is backed up. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is B. Low. The conceptual model requires all three components, asset, vulnerability, and threat. Without a credible threat, the risk is low. If a threat appears, the risk increases. Option D is incorrect because backups reduce impact but do not eliminate risk. Question 2. A company stores customer credit card data, asset. The data is encrypted at rest, no vulnerability. A hacker attempts to steal the data, threat. What is the risk? A. High, because the threat exists. B. Low, because there is no vulnerability. C. Medium, because the asset is valuable. D. High, because the hacker is determined. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is B. Low. Even with a valuable asset and a determined threat, if there is no vulnerability, the threat cannot exploit anything. Encryption eliminates the vulnerability. Risk is low. This is why defense in depth matters, remove vulnerabilities to reduce risk. Question 3. A security team identifies the following: a legacy system with no remaining support, vulnerability, containing sensitive intellectual property, asset, and accessible from the internet, threat vector. What is the risk level, and what should be the first action? A. Low risk, do nothing. B. Medium risk, monitor logs. C. high risk, isolate or patch the system immediately. D, no risk, the system is old. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is C, high risk. All three components are present: a valuable asset, a significant vulnerability, no patches, and a credible threat, internet accessibility. The first action should be to isolate the system or apply compensating controls. Doing nothing or just monitoring is insufficient. Let me share 3 traps that even experienced professionals sometimes fall into. Trap number 1, thinking that a vulnerability alone creates high risk. A vulnerability is necessary but not sufficient. Without a threat, the risk is low. For example, a locked server in a secure facility has a vulnerability. The lock could be picked, but without a threat actor nearby, the risk is low. Trap number 2, ignoring asset value when assessing risk. A high-risk vulnerability on a low-value asset may be less urgent than a medium-risk vulnerability on a critical asset. The equation includes asset value. Always prioritize based on business impact. Trap number 3, confusing threat with risk. The threat is the danger, the hacker, the malware. The risk is the probability and impact of that threat succeeding. Many people say we have a high risk of hackers. Technically, you have a high threat, and the risk depends on your vulnerabilities and assets. Now, let me give you 3 practical tips to master this concept. Tip 1, memorize the conceptual formula: asset plus vulnerability plus threat equals risk. But remember that the real calculation is likelihood times impact. On the exam, if you see a scenario missing one component, the risk is reduced or 0. Tip 2, when assessing risk, ask 3 questions. What is the asset and its value? What vulnerabilities exist? What threats are credible? Only then can you determine the risk level. Tip 3, use this conceptual model to justify security spending. If a control removes a vulnerability or reduces a threat, it lowers risk. If the asset value is high, spending more is justified. This is how you speak to business leaders. You now understand the core equation of risk management, both the conceptual model and the actual calculation. Use them to prioritize, communicate, and defend your security decisions. When you evaluate risk, you have 2 primary methods: qualitative analysis and quantitative analysis. You need to understand both because the exam will test the difference. From a technical perspective, qualitative analysis uses categories like high, medium, and low. It's subjective and based on expert judgment. Quantitative analysis uses numbers, dollar values, probabilities, and statistics. From a business perspective, qualitative is faster and works when data is scarce. Quantitative is more precise but requires reliable data and more time. Let me give you more detail. Qualitative analysis involves gathering a group of experts, brainstorming threats, and assigning relative ratings. You might use a scale of 1 to 5 or high, medium, low. The advantage is speed and flexibility. The disadvantage is subjectivity. 2 groups might get different results. Quantitative analysis uses actual dollar figures. You calculate single loss expectancy, annualized rate of occurrence, and annualized loss expectancy. The advantage is objectivity and the ability to do cost-benefit analysis. The disadvantage is that accurate data is hard to get, especially for rare events. Now, let's test your understanding. Question 1. A risk assessment team gathers a group of department heads who rank risks as critical, high, medium, and low based on their experience. What type of risk analysis is this? A. Quantitative. B. Qualitative. C. Hybrid. D. Statistical. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is B. Qualitative. It uses categories and expert judgment, not hard numbers. Quantitative would involve dollar figures and mathematical calculations. Question 2. A company calculates that the annualized loss expectancy from a data breach is $500,000. They compare this to the $300,000 cost of implementing a new control. What type of analysis is this? A. Qualitative. B. Delphi. C. Quantitative. D. Heuristic. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is C. Quantitative. Because they are using actual dollar values and mathematical comparisons. The Delphi method is a qualitative technique where experts anonymously give opinions. Heuristic is a rule-of-thumb approach. Question 3. An organization has very limited historical data on a rare type of cyber attack. They need to make a risk decision quickly. Which method is most appropriate? A. Quantitative, because it's more accurate. B. Qualitative, because it can be done faster with expert input. C. Neither, they should wait for data. D. Only quantitative is accepted for compliance. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is B. Qualitative. When data is scarce or time is limited, qualitative analysis is faster and more practical. Quantitative requires reliable data. Waiting for data may not be an option in real-world security. Compliance does not require quantitative, many frameworks accept qualitative. Let me share 3 traps that even experienced professionals sometimes fall into. Trap number 1, thinking quantitative is always better. Quantitative is precise but requires good data. Qualitative is faster but subjective. The best approach often uses both. Trap number 2, mixing the two methods incorrectly. You can use both in different phases, but don't combine numbers with categories without a clear methodology. For example, don't say high risk equals $50,000 without a defined scale. Trap number 3, forgetting that qualitative still needs a structured process. Just asking what do you think without a defined scale is not reliable. You need clear definitions for high, medium, and low. Now, let me give you 3 practical tips to master this concept. Tip 1, know the formulas for quantitative, SLE, ARO, ALE. Practice them until they are automatic. Tip 2, for qualitative, use defined scales like 1 to 5 or high, medium, low with written definitions. This reduces subjectivity. Tip 3, on the exam, if you see dollar values, it's quantitative. If you see words like high or low, it's qualitative. That simple rule will get you through most questions. Both methods have their place. Know when to use each. Now let's dive into the math behind quantitative risk analysis. You need to know these formulas for the exam and for real-world cost-benefit decisions. The 2 key calculations are single loss expectancy, or SLE, and annualized loss expectancy, or ALE. From a technical perspective, these formulas help you put a dollar value on risk. First, you calculate the SLE, the cost of a single incident. Then you multiply that by how often you expect the incident to happen per year, the annualized rate of occurrence, or ARO, to get the ALE, your expected annual loss from that risk. From a business perspective, the ALE is critical because it sets the strict maximum budget for any countermeasure. You should never spend more to protect an asset than the ALE. If a control costs more than the ALE, it is not financially justified. Let me define each term clearly. Asset value, AV, the dollar value of the asset you are protecting. This could be the replacement cost of a server, the revenue lost if data is stolen, or the fine for regulatory noncompliance. Exposure factor, EF, the percentage of asset value lost in a single incident. If a fire destroys 25% of a server, the EF is 0.25 or 25%. If a data breach exposes all customer records, the EF might be 1.0 or 100%. Single loss expectancy, SLE, the monetary loss of a single incident. The formula is AV x EF equals SLE. Annualized rate of occurrence, ARO, how many times you expect the incident to happen per year. If an incident happens once every 5 years, the ARO is 0.2. If it happens twice per year, the ARO is 2. Annualized loss expectancy, ALE, the expected annual loss from that risk. The formula is, SLE x ARO equals ALE. Now, let me walk you through the illustrated example on this slide. The slide shows a server with an asset value of $100,000. The exposure factor is 25%, meaning that if a disaster occurs, only 25% of the server's value would be lost. So the single loss expectancy is $100,000 multiplied by 0.25, which equals $25,000. That is the cost of one incident. Next, the slide shows that this incident is expected to happen once every 5 years. That means the annualized rate of occurrence is 1 divided by 5, which equals 0.2 incidents per year. Finally, to get the annualized loss expectancy, we multiply the SLE of $25,000 by the ARO of 0.2. That gives us $5,000 per year. This means the organization can expect to lose, on average, $5,000 each year from this risk. The most important takeaway, the ALE sets the strict maximum budget for any countermeasure. You should not spend more than $5,000 per year to protect against this specific risk. If a control costs $6,000 per year, it is not financially justified. If it costs $4,000 per year, it is justified. Now, let's test your understanding. Question 1. A server is valued at $200,000. A fire is expected to destroy 40% of the server if it occurs. What is the single loss expectancy, SLE? A. $80,000. B. $120,000. C. $200,000. D. $40,000. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is A. $80,000. SLE equals AV x EF equals $200,000 x 0.4 equals $80,000. Option B would be 60%, option C is the full value, option D is 20%. Question 2. A company calculates that the single loss expectancy for a data breach is $50,000. Based on industry data, they expect one breach every 2 years. What is the annualized loss expectancy, ALE? A. $50,000. B. $100,000. C. $25,000. D. $10,000. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is C. $25,000. ALE equals SLE x ARO. ARO equals 1/2 equals 0.5. $50,000 x 0.5 equals $25,000. Option A is the SLE, option B would be SLE x 2, option D would be SLE x 0.2. Question 3. Using the slide's example, AV equals $100,000, EF equals 25%, ARO equals 0.2. What is the maximum annual budget you should spend on a countermeasure for this risk? A. $100,000. B. $25,000. C. $5,000. D. $20,000. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is C. $5,000. The ALE is $5,000, and that sets the strict maximum budget. Spending more than the ALE is not financially justified. Option A is the AV, option B is the SLE, option D is a distractor. Let me share 3 traps that even experienced professionals sometimes fall into. Trap number 1, confusing SLE with ALE. SLE is the loss per single incident. ALE is the expected loss per year. In the example, the SLE is $25,000, but the ALE is only $5,000 because the event happens only once every 5 years. You cannot use SLE as your annual budget. Trap number 2, forgetting that ALE sets the maximum budget. Some people think they should spend up to the SLE, but that would be overinvesting for rare events. The correct limit is the ALE. Trap number 3, using incorrect exposure factor. The EF is the percentage of asset value lost, not necessarily the full value. In the example, 25% is used, not 100%. Overestimating EF leads to overinvestment. Now, let me give you 3 practical tips to master this concept. Tip 1, memorize the formulas in order. AV x EF equals SLE. SLE x RO equals ALE. Practice with the example numbers until they feel automatic. Tip 2, on the exam, when you see numbers, write them down and do the math step by step. Do not try to do it in your head. The exam expects you to calculate correctly. Tip 3, remember that the ALE is the maximum annual budget for a countermeasure. If a control costs less than the ALE reduction, it is justified. If it costs more, you need a non-financial reason, compliance, reputation, strategic value. You now have the quantitative tools to justify security spending. Use them wisely. When you identify a risk, you have 4 primary strategic responses. You also need to understand the concept of residual risk. The exam loves to test your ability to choose the right response and to understand what happens after controls are applied. From a technical perspective, each response involves different actions. Avoid eliminates the activity. Mitigate implements controls. Accept is a conscious decision to do nothing. Transfer shifts financial risk to a third party. Residual risk is what remains after controls are in place. From a business perspective, these responses align with risk appetite. A risk-averse company might avoid or mitigate. A risk-tolerant company might accept or transfer. Let me define each one clearly. Avoid, eliminate the activity or path entirely. This means you stop doing the risky activity. You terminate a project. You shut down a vulnerable system. You decide not to store certain types of data. Avoidance is the only response that completely removes the risk. However, it also removes any benefits that came with the activity. Mitigate, implement controls to reduce the likelihood or the impact. You install a firewall. You patch software. You train employees. Mitigation is what most people think of as security. It reduces risk but does not eliminate it completely. Accept, live with the risk. This is a conscious, documented management decision to take no action. Acceptance is appropriate when the cost of a control exceeds the potential loss, or when the risk is within the organization's risk appetite. Acceptance must be documented. Ignoring a risk without documentation is negligence. Transfer, hand the financial burden to insurance or a third party. You purchase cyber liability insurance. You outsource a service to a cloud provider. Transfer shifts the financial impact but not the accountability. You are still responsible to your customers and regulators. Residual risk, this is the risk that remains after controls are applied. No control reduces risk to zero. Residual risk is formally accepted by management. For example, after implementing a firewall, some small risk of a breach remains. That residual risk must be documented and approved by leadership. If management does not formally accept residual risk, the organization is not in a compliant risk posture. Now, let's test your understanding. Question 1. An organization decides to discontinue a legacy system that cannot be patched instead of trying to secure it. What risk response is this? A. Mitigate. B. Transfer. C. Avoid. D. Accept. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is C. Avoid. By discontinuing the system, they eliminate the risk entirely. Mitigate would be adding controls. Transfer would be insurance. Accept would be doing nothing. Question 2. A company implements a firewall, intrusion detection system, and security awareness training to reduce the risk of a cyber attack. However, some risk remains. What is the term for the risk that remains after these controls are applied? A. Inherent risk. B. Residual risk. C. Transferred risk. D. Avoided risk. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is B. Residual risk. Residual risk is what remains after controls are implemented. It must be formally accepted by management. Inherent risk is the original risk before any controls. Question 3. After a risk assessment, management determines that the cost of a security control is higher than the expected loss from the risk. They decide to take no action and document their decision. What risk response is this? A. Mitigate. B. Transfer. C. Avoid. D. Accept. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is D. Accept. Acceptance is a conscious, documented decision to live with the risk. The documentation is critical, it separates acceptance from negligence. Let me share 3 traps that even experienced professionals sometimes fall into. Trap number 1. Confusing acceptance with ignorance. Acceptance is deliberate and documented. Ignoring a risk without documentation is negligence, not acceptance. On the exam, if management doesn't know about the risk or hasn't formally accepted it, that's not acceptance. Trap number 2, thinking that transfer removes all responsibility. You can transfer financial risk, but you cannot transfer accountability. If a vendor has a breach, your customers will still blame you. Regulatory fines still target you. Trap number 3, forgetting that residual risk must be formally accepted. Many organizations implement controls and assume the remaining risk is fine. That is not sufficient. Management must document their acceptance of residual risk. Now, let me give you 3 practical tips to master this concept. Tip 1, memorize the 4 primary responses: avoid, mitigate, accept, transfer. Also remember that residual risk is what remains after mitigation and must be accepted by management. Tip 2, on the exam, look for keywords: shut down or terminate means avoid. Firewall or training means mitigate. Documented decision to do nothing means accept. Insurance or outsource means transfer. Tip 3, always look for documentation. If the scenario says management documented their decision to accept the risk, that is proper acceptance. If there is no documentation, it is negligence. These responses give you a complete toolkit for risk decisions. Master them. Now let's talk about the global rules of the road. You cannot operate in cybersecurity without understanding the major compliance frameworks. The exam tests 4 key regulations: GDPR, SOX, HIPAA, and PCI-DSS. From a technical perspective, each regulation imposes specific controls. Encryption requirements, access logging, breach notification timelines, audit trails. From a business perspective, non-compliance can mean massive fines, loss of customers, and even prison time for executives. You need to know which regulations apply to your organization. Let me define each one clearly. GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. This is an EU regulation, but it applies globally. If you process or store the personal data of any EU citizen, GDPR applies. It doesn't matter where your servers are. Focus, privacy and consent. Core mandates, 72-hour breach notification, the right to be forgotten, and data protection impact assessments. Fines can reach up to 20 million euros or 4% of global annual revenue, whichever is higher. SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley Act. This is a U.S. law that applies to publicly traded companies. It was created after the Enron and WorldCom scandals to protect investors. Focus, financial reporting integrity. Core mandates: companies must maintain accurate financial records and have strong internal controls over financial reporting. For security professionals, this means ensuring that financial systems have proper access controls, audit trails, and change management. HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. This is a U.S. law that applies to healthcare providers, insurers, and any business associates that handle protected health information, or PHI. Focus, privacy and security of medical records. Core mandates: administrative, physical, and technical safeguards must be in place. Patients have the right to access their own records. Breach notification is required. PCI DSS, Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. This is not a law. It is a set of standards enforced by the major credit card companies, Visa, MasterCard, American Express. If you accept, process, or store credit card data, you must comply. Focus, protecting cardholder data. Core mandates: there are 12 requirements, including firewall configuration, encryption of cardholder data, vulnerability management, and access control. Non-compliance can result in massive fines and loss of the ability to process credit card payments. Now, let's test your understanding. Question 1. A US-based e-commerce company stores credit card numbers and also collects customer email addresses for marketing. The company has customers in France. Which regulations apply? A. Only PCI DSS. B. Only GDPR. C. Both GDPR and PCI DSS. D. GDPR, PCI DSS, and SOX. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is C, both GDPR and PCI DSS. GDPR applies because of the French customer's personal data. PCI DSS applies because of the credit card data. SOX only applies if the company is publicly traded, which is not stated. Question 2. A hospital's IT system is breached, exposing patient medical records. Which regulation primarily governs the breach notification requirements for this incident? A. GDPR. B. SOX. C. HIPAA. D. PCI DSS. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is C. HIPAA. Because it protects protected health information. GDPR would apply only if EU citizens are involved. SOX is for financial reporting. PCI DSS is for payment cards. Question 3. A publicly traded company experiences a financial reporting error because someone altered transaction records without proper authorization. Which regulation is most relevant to this scenario? A. GDPR. B. SOX. C. HIPAA. D. PCI DSS. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is B. SOX. It governs the integrity of financial reporting for public companies. The other regulations address privacy, healthcare, or payment cards. Let me share 3 traps that even experienced professionals sometimes fall into. Trap number 1, assuming that compliance equals security. Being compliant does not mean you are secure. Compliance is the floor, not the ceiling. Many organizations that pass an audit still get breached. Trap number 2, thinking that a regulation only applies in the country where the company is based. GDPR follows the data subject, not the data center. If you have EU customers, GDPR applies even if your servers are in Texas. Trap number 3, forgetting that PCI DSS is not a law but a contractual standard. Non-compliance can still result in massive fines and loss of payment processing ability. It is not optional just because it's not a law. Now, let me give you 3 practical tips to master this concept. Tip 1, when you see a compliance question, first identify the type of data: medical, payment, personal, or financial. That tells you which regulation is primary. Tip 2. Memorize the core mandates: 72 hours for GDPR, safeguards for HIPAA, 12 requirements for PCI DSS, and internal controls for SOX. Tip 3. Know that SOX is about financial reporting integrity, not data privacy. Many candidates confuse SOX with data protection laws. Compliance is a critical part of risk management. Know your frameworks. Intellectual property is one of the most valuable assets any organization has. It includes trade secrets, copyrights, patents, and trademarks. Protecting IP is a core security responsibility. From a technical perspective, you need controls like data loss prevention, access restrictions, encryption, and NDAs. From a business perspective, IP is often the most valuable asset a company owns. Losing a trade secret can destroy a competitive advantage. Failing to protect a patent can cost millions in lost revenue. Let me define each type clearly. Trade secrets are confidential business information that gives a company a competitive advantage. The formula for Coca-Cola, the Google search algorithm, a secret manufacturing process. Trade secrets have no expiration as long as they remain secret. Once disclosed, they lose protection. Security controls include NDAs, access restrictions, and data loss prevention. Copyrights protect original works of authorship. Books, music, software code, architectural drawings. Copyright gives the creator exclusive rights to reproduce, distribute, and display the work. In the US, copyright lasts for the life of the author plus 70 years. For works made for hire, it's 95 years from publication or 120 years from creation. Patents protect inventions. A new process, a machine, a chemical composition. Patents give the inventor exclusive rights to exclude others from making, using, or selling the invention for a limited time, typically 20 years from filing. Unlike trade secrets, patents require public disclosure. You trade secrecy for legal protection. Trademarks protect brand identifiers. Logos, names, slogans, symbols. Think of the Nike swoosh, the Apple logo, or the phrase "just do it." Trademarks can last forever as long as they are used in commerce and defended against infringement. Now, let's test your understanding. Question 1. A software company develops a proprietary algorithm that gives it a market advantage. The company chooses not to file for a patent and instead keeps the algorithm locked in a secure vault with access limited to 3 employees. What type of intellectual property protection is this? A. Copyright. B. Patent. C. Trade secret. D. Trademark. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is C. Trade secret. They are relying on secrecy rather than public registration. A patent would require public disclosure. Copyright protects expression, not ideas. Trademark protects brand identifiers. Question 2. A musician writes a new song. How long does copyright protection last under U.S. law? A. 20 years from filing. B. Life of the author plus 70 years. C. Forever as long as it's used. D. 95 years from creation regardless of author's life. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is B. Life of the author plus 70 years. For works made for hire, it's 95 years from publication or 120 years from creation. Option A is for patents. Option C is for trademarks. Option D is for works made for hire, not for an individual author. Question 3. A company's logo is copied by a competitor. The company wants to stop the competitor from using a similar logo. What type of IP protection should they assert? A. Trade secret. B. Copyright. C. Patent. D. Trademark. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is D, trademark. Trademarks protect brand identifiers like logos, names, and slogans. Copyright would protect artistic expression but not the brand identifier in commerce. Patent protects inventions. Trade secret requires secrecy. Let me share 3 traps that even experienced professionals sometimes fall into. Trap number 1, confusing trade secrets with patents. Trade secrets require secrecy and have no expiration. Patents require public disclosure and expire after 20 years. You cannot patent something that is already a trade secret, the secrecy would be lost. Trap number 2, thinking that copyright protects ideas. It protects the expression of ideas, not the ideas themselves. You cannot copyright a concept, only the specific way you expressed it. Trap number 3, forgetting that trademarks can be lost if not defended. If you don't enforce your trademark against infringers, you can lose it. Genericization is a real risk, think of escalator or aspirin, which were once trademarks. Now, let me give you 3 practical tips to master this concept. Tip 1, memorize the 4 types and their durations: trade secret indefinite, patent 20 years, copyright life plus 70, trademark indefinite if used and defended. Tip 2, on the exam, if the scenario involves secrecy, it's a trade secret. If it involves public registration, it's a patent or trademark. If it involves creative work, it's copyright. Tip 3, know that NDAs are a key control for trade secrets. Without an NDA, sharing a trade secret can destroy its legal protection. Protecting IP is protecting the future of the business. You can outsource a service, but you cannot outsource accountability. This is absolutely critical for the exam and for your career. When you hire a third-party vendor, you are transferring some operational risk, but ultimate responsibility stays with you. From a technical perspective, you need contracts that give you visibility into the vendor's security posture. From a business perspective, outsourcing can save money and increase efficiency, but it also introduces new risks. Your customers don't care who caused the breach, they care that your company exposed their data. There are 3 key contractual instruments you need. Service level agreements, or SLAs, define performance expectations, uptime guarantees, and security response times. An SLA might say the vendor will patch critical vulnerabilities within 48 hours. Non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs, enforce confidentiality. The vendor cannot share your data or your business processes with anyone else. Right to audit, this is the most important. It gives you the contractual authority to verify the vendor's security posture. You can request evidence of their controls, their penetration test results, their incident response logs. Without the right to audit, you are trusting blindly. The golden rule, you can outsource the operational service, but you can never outsource the ultimate accountability. The buck stops with you. Now, let's test your understanding. Question 1. A company uses a cloud provider to store customer data. The cloud provider suffers a breach, and customer data is exposed. Who is ultimately accountable to the affected customers? A. The cloud provider. B. The company that owns the data. C. Both equally. D. The cloud provider's insurer. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is B. The company that owns the data. The cloud provider may have contractual liability, but the company holds the customer relationship and the regulatory responsibility. You cannot outsource accountability. Question 2. What contractual provision gives a company the right to verify a vendor's security controls, such as requesting evidence of penetration test results? A. SLA. B. NDA. C. Right to audit. D. MAU. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is C. Right to audit. SLAs define performance. NDAs protect confidentiality. MOUs are memoranda of understanding, typically less formal. The right to audit is specifically for verification. Question 3. A company signs a contract with a vendor that includes an SLA with 99.9% uptime guarantee. The vendor experiences an outage and offers a service credit. However, the outage also caused a data breach due to the vendor's poor security. What is the company's best course of action? A. Accept the service credit and move on. B. Sue the vendor for the breach. C. Review the contract for security provisions and right to audit, then assess the vendor's compliance. D. Immediately terminate the contract. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is C. The SLA covers uptime, not security. The company should review security provisions, exercise any right to audit, and assess whether the vendor violated security obligations. Terminating immediately may not be possible without cause. Accepting a service credit ignores the security breach. Suing may be an option, but first you need to understand the contract. Let me share 3 traps that even experienced professionals sometimes fall into. Trap number 1, assuming that a signed contract means the vendor is actually secure. A contract is not a control. You need ongoing monitoring and audits. Many breaches happen at vendors that had perfect contracts but poor execution. Trap number 2, thinking that outsourcing transfers liability. It may transfer some financial risk, but reputation and regulatory accountability remain yours. Your customers will still sue you, not the vendor. Trap number 3, forgetting the right to audit. Without it, you have no way to verify the vendor's security. Many standard contracts omit this clause. You must insist on it. Now, let me give you 3 practical tips to master this concept. Tip 1, always include a right to audit clause in third-party contracts. If the vendor refuses, consider whether the risk is worth it. Tip 2, conduct periodic vendor risk assessments, not just at onboarding. Vendors change their security posture over time. Reassess annually. Tip 3, remember the golden rule, accountability stays with you. On the exam, if a question involves third-party risk, the correct answer often involves the organization retaining responsibility. The outsourced illusion is dangerous. See through it. Now let's talk about 2 critical plans that every organization needs, the business continuity plan and the disaster recovery plan. Many people use these terms interchangeably, but they are not the same. Understanding the difference is essential for the exam and for real-world crisis management. From a technical perspective, the Disaster Recovery Plan, or DRP, is a strict, technical subset focused purely on the restoration of IT systems, data, and infrastructure. It answers the question, how do we get the servers back online? The Business Continuity Plan, or BCP, is the overarching strategy for total organizational survival and operational continuity during a crisis. It answers the question, how does the business keep functioning while IT is recovering? From a business perspective, the BCP includes people, processes, facilities, supply chains, and communication. The DRP is one part of the BCP. You cannot have effective business continuity without disaster recovery, but disaster recovery alone is not enough. Let me define each one clearly. Business Continuity Plan, BCP, this is the big picture. The BCP ensures that the entire organization can survive and continue operating during and after a crisis. It covers alternative work locations, manual workarounds, communication with customers and employees, supply chain alternatives, and prioritization of business functions. The BCP is driven by the Business Impact Analysis, or BIA, which identifies which processes are most critical. The BCP is strategic and broad. Disaster Recovery Plan, DRP, this is a strict, technical subset of the BCP. The DRP focuses purely on restoring IT systems, data, and infrastructure. It includes procedures for recovering servers, databases, networks, and applications. It defines recovery time objectives, RTOs, and recovery point objectives, RPOs, for each system. The DRP is tactical and technical. It assumes that the business continuity team is handling the rest of the organization. The key relationship, the DRP enables the BCP. Without restored IT systems, many business functions cannot resume. But the BCP also includes actions that do not depend on IT, such as moving employees to a secondary site or using paper-based processes. Now, let's test your understanding. Question 1. A company experiences a ransomware attack that encrypts all servers. The IT team begins restoring data from backups. Meanwhile, the HR department sets up a temporary payroll process using paper forms. Which plan is the HR department following? A. Disaster recovery plan. B. Business continuity plan. C. Incident response plan. D. Business impact analysis. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is B. Business continuity plan. The BCP covers non-IT operational continuity, such as manual workarounds. The DRP focuses only on IT restoration. The incident response plan handles the immediate response to the attack. The BIA is the assessment that informs the plans, not the plan itself. Question 2. Which of the following is the best description of a disaster recovery plan? A. A strategy for keeping the entire organization running during a crisis. B. A technical plan for restoring IT systems, data, and infrastructure. C. A communication plan for notifying customers after a breach. D. A financial plan for transferring risk through insurance. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is B. The DRP is strictly technical: servers, data, networks, infrastructure. Option A describes the BCP. Option C is part of incident response. Option D is risk transfer. Question 3. A fire destroys the primary data center. The BCP is activated. The DRP is executed. Which of the following activities belongs exclusively to the DRP, not the broader BCP? A. Moving employees to an alternate work site. B. Restoring the customer database from backups. C. Activating the emergency communication system to notify employees. D. Arranging for temporary office supplies. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is B. Restoring the customer database from backups. That is purely technical IT restoration. Moving employees, A. Communication, C. And office supplies, D. Are business continuity activities that do not depend on IT restoration. Let me share 3 traps that even experienced professionals sometimes fall into. Trap number 1, using the terms BCP and DRP interchangeably. They are not the same. The DRP is a subset of the BCP. On the exam, if a question describes restoring servers, that is DRP. If it describes keeping the business running with manual processes, that is BCP. Trap number 2, thinking that the DRP is sufficient for business survival. IT restoration is critical, but if employees cannot access the building or communicate with customers, the business still fails. The BCP addresses those non-IT aspects. Trap number 3, forgetting that the BCP must be tested regularly, not just the DRP. Many organizations test their server recovery but never test their manual workarounds or alternate site procedures. A plan that is not tested is not a plan. Now, let me give you 3 practical tips to master this concept. Tip 1, remember the hierarchy. BCP is the umbrella. DRP is one component under that umbrella. Other components include crisis communication, facility management, and supply chain continuity. Tip 2, on the exam, look for keywords. Servers, backups, RTO, RPO point to DRP. Alternate site, manual process, employee communication, business functions point to BCP. Tip 3, know that the business impact analysis, BIA, drives both plans. The BIA identifies critical functions and their recovery priorities. Without a BIA, neither plan can be effective. You now understand the critical difference between BCP and DRP. Both are essential. One focuses on technology, the other on the entire organization. Use them together to survive any crisis. Now let's look at this illustration. It shows a timeline that every security professional must understand. This is the recovery timeline after a disaster. Let me walk you through it step by step, as if we were looking at the diagram together. First, on the left side of the timeline, we have a point in time called the Recovery Point Objective, or RPO. The RPO is the maximum acceptable data loss measured in time. It answers the question, how far back can we lose data and still survive? For example, if your RPO is 1 hour, you can afford to lose up to 1 hour of transactions. You must back up at least every hour. The RPO is a point in time before the disaster. Any data created after the RPO but before the disaster is considered lost. Then, we have T equals 0. This is the moment the disaster strikes. The fire, the ransomware attack, the flood. Everything before T equals 0 is the past. Everything after T equals 0 is recovery. After T equals 0, we have the recovery time objective, or RTO. The RTO is the target time to restore critical IT systems. It answers the question, how fast must we be back online? If your RTO is 4 hours, you need to have your systems operational within 4 hours after the disaster. The clock starts at T equals 0. Finally, we have the maximum tolerable downtime, or MTD. This is the absolute limit of outage before the business dies. If you exceed the MTD, the organization may fail permanently, bankruptcy, loss of customers, regulatory shutdown. The MTD is the point of no return. Here is the most important relationship on the entire slide, RTO must be shorter than MTD. If your RTO is longer than your MTD, your recovery plan is worthless. You will never recover fast enough to save the business. For example, if your MTD is 24 hours, your RTO must be less than 24 hours, ideally much less. The RTO is a target you set. The MTD is a hard limit you cannot exceed. Now, let's test your understanding with a scenario based on this illustration. Question 1. A company has an MTD of 48 hours for its order processing system. Which of the following RTOs would be acceptable? A. 72 hours. B. 48 hours. C. 36 hours. D. 60 hours. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is C. 36 hours. RTO must be shorter than MTD. 36 hours is less than 48. 48 hours is equal, but equal is risky because any delay exceeds MTD. Best practice is RTO significantly shorter than MTD. Options A and D exceed MTD and are unacceptable. Question 2. A company sets an RPO of 15 minutes. This means, A, the company can tolerate 15 minutes of system downtime. B, the company can tolerate losing up to 15 minutes of data. C, the company must recover systems within 15 minutes. D, the company has 15 minutes to declare a disaster. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is B, RPO is about data loss measured in time, how far back you can lose data. Option A describes RTO. Option C also describes RTO. Option D is not a standard metric. Question 3. A disaster occurs at 2 p.m. The RPO is 1 hour. The last backup completed at 1 p.m. How much data loss is acceptable? A. 0 minutes. B. 1 hour. C. 2 hours. D. Cannot be determined. Now, I think you should pause the video and think for a few seconds. Welcome back. The correct answer is B. 1 hour. The RPO defines the maximum acceptable data loss. Since the last backup was at 1 p.m., any transactions between 1 p.m. and 2 p.m., the disaster, could be lost. That is 1 hour of potential data loss, which is within the RPO. Let me share 3 final traps for the exam. Trap number 1, confusing RPO with RTO. RPO is about data loss, how far back. RTO is about time to recover, how fast. Remember, RPO equals data, RTO equals time. Trap number 2, setting RTO equal to or longer than MTD. This is a fatal mistake. RTO must be strictly shorter than MTD. If they are equal, any delay kills the business. Trap number 3, forgetting that RPO and RTO are determined by business needs, not technical capabilities. The business decides how much data loss and downtime it can tolerate. IT figures out how to meet those targets. Now, let me give you 3 general tips to succeed on the CISSP exam. Tip 1, always think like a manager, not a technician. The exam tests your ability to align security with business objectives. When you see a question, ask yourself, what would a CISO or a business leader do? The most technically perfect answer is often wrong if it ignores business impact. Tip 2, read every question carefully. The exam loves to include small words like not, except, most, or least. One word changes the entire meaning. Slow down and read twice. Tip 3, when you are unsure between 2 answers, choose the one that is risk-based and business-aligned. The CISSP is not a technical hacking exam. It is a management exam. The answer that considers risk appetite, business continuity, and ethical responsibility is usually correct. You have now completed a comprehensive review of CISSP Domain 1, Security and Risk Management. We covered the ISC2 Code of Ethics, STRIDE, the CIA and DAD triads, IAAA, policies and standards, separation of duties, split knowledge, job rotation, mandatory vacations, the risk equation, qualitative and quantitative analysis, risk responses, global compliance, intellectual property, third-party risk, BCP versus DRP, and the recovery timeline with RPO, RTO, and MTD. I invite you to stay tuned for our next videos, where we will cover the other domains of the CISSP certification, Domain 2, Asset Security, Domain 3, Security Architecture and Engineering, and all the way through Domain 8. To those of you taking the exam soon, I wish you the very best of luck. Trust your preparation. Think like a manager. Protect society first. And go past that exam. See you in the next video.